Hello, and thank you for tuning in to CITR 101.9 FM. You are listening to Democracy Watch, the News Collective's weekly news report bringing you alternative and undercovered current affairs from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. My name is Alex DeBoer, and it is just me today as it's busy midterm season for most of the News Collective. Today is Thursday, November 1st, and it's 5:05 p.m. We're broadcasting from UBC's Vancouver campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. So on today's show, we're going to hear an interview with Research Co. President Mario Canseco. Mario Canseco, as I mentioned, is president of Research Co., which is a public opinion polling company based in Vancouver. Research Co. recently did a survey of Vancouverites who voted in our 2018 municipal election, which just happened on October 20th. And this survey looked into what factors may have contributed to Vancouver's low voter turnout, which was down to 39% of eligible voters from 44% turnout in the previous municipal election in 2014. So he looked into a number of things, and the results were a comment on why people might not have come out to vote. So let's take a listen to that interview and hear these different reasons. Here we go. I'm wondering if you can just start out by telling me who you are.
Well, my name is Mario Canseco. I've been working as a public opinion researcher since 2003. I've had a new company called Research Co., which started in April of this year. We've been very successful in looking at elections. We had the election in Ontario, the election in Quebec, the election in Vancouver, and we're going to be looking forward to conducting some surveys over the weekend.
Can you tell me a bit more about that survey and what methodology you used?
Well, what I tried to do is capture the views of voters who cast their ballots before Election Day. So we had about, I'd say, 20-30% of residents of the city of Vancouver who had already cast their ballot when we asked our final election poll that was published. And then I asked people who voted on the final couple of days about their views on the election, and also kept it open so that people who voted could actually voice some of their opinions on the outcome of the election on the Sunday and Monday after. So it's a combination of things. It's essentially allowing people who voted to take part in a survey afterwards, which is the idea of an exit poll, but also those who had already cast their votes, asking them about specific things that they felt about the candidates that they supported.
Right. But so everyone who you asked had already cast their ballot, or some
Yes.
were yet to? Okay. And was the survey done online, or was it done over the phone?
It was conducted online. I had a couple of surveys in field over the final weekend just to capture everybody who voted. And it's essentially one of those surveys where the first question is, did you vote already? Yes, I did. Okay, then we're going to ask you a few questions. If you hadn't voted, then you don't get the questions related to your motivations for voting. So it's essentially a survey of people who voted. Some of them voted maybe days before, or sometimes even a week before Election Day, because we had so many opportunities in the advance polls. And then the rest of the survey was conducted after the election on Sunday and Monday.
Great. Makes sense. So from this survey, did you find that residents believe it should be harder for candidates to run for office?
Yeah, that was one of the interesting issues is, talking to people, I think we saw a level of confusion related to the election because of the amount of candidates we had and the length of the ballot. One of the things that was quite interesting is how many people took a list to the polling station. When I asked this 4 years ago, it was around 43%, and this year it climbed almost to two-thirds. So you had a lot of people who did a little bit of research, figured out who they wanted to vote for, particularly for council, for school board, and for parks board, and took the list to the polling station, which is a massive change from what we saw the last time around, where most residents didn't do that. And I wanted to get into a little bit of, is there a reason to have so many candidates on the ballot? Is the threshold too low when it comes to the deposit that they have and the number of signatures that they need to collect in order to run? And I do see that there's a lot of residents who believe that the threshold should be a little bit higher for both. I mean, there's definitely a higher level of support on the signature issue. Right now, candidates have to present 25 signatures of support for their nomination. In the exit poll, I asked people, what if we raise it to 100? And you see a large majority of residents who said that that should be the case. The issue of money was a little more contentious. Right now, they have to deposit $100, which they get back after the democratic process is over. I asked the question about whether that should be raised to $500. We still saw a majority of city of Vancouver voters saying that that should be the case, but it wasn't as much. So I think there's a situation here where it's more about establishing something that looks like a candidacy. If you have 100 people supporting what you want to do, and a little less support for actually making this more of a fundraising effort. So I think it's an interesting situation, and it'll take a lot of discussions with the city if they actually want to change it. But in my estimation, we had a lot of people who added their name just for the fun of it, particularly in the mayoral race. I think the council candidates who were independent definitely brought a level of debate that was interesting. Particularly people like Sarah Bliss, like Adrian Crook, a lot of new candidates who were talking about specific things they wanted to do, and many people gravitated towards them as the campaign went on. But at the end of the night, you saw people revert to the party structure. A lot of people voting for the full NPA slate. If you were a Vision Vancouver voter, you were more likely to vote for Greens and maybe a little bit of COPE, maybe a little bit of One City. So I think in a way, party structures definitely help some of those candidates. But you did have a lot of people in the mayoral race who really weren't going to get anywhere. And they were very adamant on social media, some of them, that they weren't taken seriously, that the process was rigged, and they end up getting less than 1% of the vote. So if you find a way to make sure that the playing field is a little more even, then maybe you have more candidates who are serious about this and not just people who want to do it because it's a lot of fun.
Right, and of course with the mayor's seat, there's only one seat. So if you're not taking it seriously, you're vying for a very small win. Or whereas with council, there's 10 spots, so you have perhaps a better shot. But I'm interested in the idea of whether candidates who are running for office or for mayor should be paying more of a deposit versus or including getting more signatures. So it seems like if there was a bit more disparity over the issue of whether the fee should go up, but most people agreed that they should be required to have more signatures. So I assume that's probably an issue of, making sure things are fair. Like probably more people want the money to be less of an issue so that it's more of an even playing field. But I did notice in your survey that the respondents who most thought it would be appropriate to raise the amount of money required to run for office were people 55 and over. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that demographic or other demographic breakdowns for folks who were in favor or not in favor of this.
Yeah, it's definitely a situation where the baby boomers would like to see this change. I think they were definitely more likely to be confused by the whole process. They were used to municipal elections. And again, there's only a small number of people who vote in these elections. I mean, we haven't had a voter turnout higher than 50% in decades for municipal elections within the city. Right. So that explains a little bit of the over 55 voters saying, what happened now? Last time around we had, 7, 10 candidates for mayor and, less than 100 candidates for council. And now we have this behemoth of a ballot. I mean, there's got to be a better way to do this. It's not necessarily the money, but I think what we saw is a situation, especially in the final stages of the registration, where essentially people were jumping in because they thought it was going to be easy. And, there's videos, there's people standing at the registration office at 5 to 4 p.m., basically begging people who are waiting for their boss to sign their nomination papers. It's just ludicrous. It's not the way in which you want to do this type of situation. Most of the candidates got more than 100 votes, so you're expecting somebody like that to be able to gather signatures. Mm-hmm. And it would make things a little bit easier. I think some of the candidates who jumped into this were a little more than noise. And in a situation like the one we have with social media, where anybody can approach anybody else and say, well, I'm a candidate and you should treat me fairly and you should include me in your surveys and you should include me in your debates. It's just not workable to have 21 people on a stage. It's not workable to add a name to a survey of somebody who's going to be little more than statistical noise.
Do you find that generally in surveys about local elections that older folks, baby boomers, tend to be more in favor of higher financial investment to run in elections? Like, were you surprised by the fact that people 55 and over were more likely to want to raise the amount needed to run for office to $500?
No, I don't think I was surprised. And one of the reasons for that is the people who are involved in the municipal political issue are usually already well connected. They know somebody who ran. They are more familiar with the whole process, certainly more than first-time voters or those who are fairly new to the city. So in that sense, they know that it takes money. They know that, let's say for the sake of argument, if they're MPA supporters, they know that you need a lot of money to run campaigns. You need a lot of money to do things. Mm-hmm. And that definitely plays a role in the way in which they see it. Well, $100 is not that much, and you get it back at the end of the process. So maybe you should be able to raise $500. Gather 5 friends, and everybody gives you 100, or gather 100 friends, and everybody gives you 5. It's one of the ways in which you make sure that there's no joke candidates who essentially want to be taken seriously when, at the end of the night, the voters don't take them seriously because they all finish with less than 1% of the votes.
Right. And then from the survey you did, there were a bunch of things that probably contributed to voter turnout being lower in this municipal election than the previous one in 2014. Did you have a sense of what might have been the biggest impediment?
Well, looking into the survey and comparing it to what we saw in 2014, there is a significant drop in the proportion of residents of Vancouver who voted in the election who were exposed to advertisements. And that is directly related to the new legislation related to campaign financing. 4 years ago, we had a lot of money from unions, a lot of money from corporations that was going into the campaigns of Gregor Robertson and Kirk LaPointe primarily. And you have television ads, you had a lot of radio ads. This time around, we had a little bit of radio and a little bit of television, but not that much. And it's definitely more difficult to spend the money that is necessary to have advertisements. We saw an increase in the use of social media, which is also understandable. There's more people who have been exposed to this and different ways in which you can express your views politically. So it's a little bit of a change. It's not the same campaign that we had 4 years ago where you had ads for Robertson or for LaPointe at various times on television. This time around, it just didn't work that way.
Right.
And it's also difficult because of the size of the city. If we had amalgamated, it would be easier for a TV station to say, well, yes, I will take the ad for the Vancouver campaign, even though my audience is the entire metro area, and this is only going to be interesting for 26% of them.
Right. Yeah, and I want to talk about amalgamation. I'm just curious, though. So did you ask respondents to the survey whether they had encountered advertisement? Was that one of the questions?
Yes, it was one of the questions.
Okay. And what was the amount that had been exposed to election advertising?
It was lower by about 24 points. So the last time around, I think it was around 67%, and this time around it was lower than 50. So there's definitely a shift. And it's not like what we've seen. I've asked a similar question after federal elections, after provincial elections, and it's always been increased. There's always this exposure, which is a little bit easier on federal and the BC elections because it's a larger playing field. You can have an ad for the leader of a specific political party running all the time. There will be a candidate in your riding for that particular candidate. But when it comes to the city of Vancouver, it's just a really big investment. And, a lot of people decided to spend the money that they had, even though the MPA had more funds available at their disposal than anybody else. It was still significantly lower than what they had 4 years ago. So when that happens, you have to be very selective and say, maybe I'll spend it on pizza for my door knockers and not on a TV ad that maybe people won't see.
Absolutely. And then back to the topic of amalgamation. So 34% of your respondents said they're interested in amalgamating all the Metro Vancouver municipalities, which is something Toronto did. So why specifically would amalgamation increase voter turnout? And is this something that other cities besides Toronto have turned to as a way of increasing voter turnout?
I think something similar happened in Montreal when they amalgamated. There were more people who were engaged in the process. It's a little bit easier also for the media to cover races. I had a lot of chats with Metro Vancouver-based newspapers who were very interested in the races in their own municipalities. And I entertained phone calls from reporters in Port Moody who said, who's winning this? And I told them, well, it's kind of complicated because it's a fairly small piece of land. And, all I can do right now with the tools at my disposal is do Vancouver. I can't do Surrey. I can't do Burnaby. I certainly can't do Port Moody. But imagine a situation where the whole Metro Vancouver area amalgamates, and then you have the same candidate running for mayor in the entire area. It's beneficial as well for coverage. Talking to, I spent election night at CTV looking into all of the races and chatting with the producers of the show. They were saying it's a difficult situation for us as far as coverage is concerned because, we want to feature a 5-minute story on the candidates running for mayor in Vancouver, but 3 out of 4 of our viewers are not in Vancouver. So we're worried that they're going to essentially turn the TV off or flip the channel. If we had amalgamated, those would be the candidates for the entire metro area. So that makes the race a lot more compelling and a lot easier for the media to deal with. But that being said, the appetite from the city of Vancouver is not that big when it comes to trying to do something similar to what Toronto did. And I think one of the reasons for that is there's a concern that the areas that are surrounding Vancouver are going to vote very differently on many things: bike lanes, environmental protection. Even if the election was close, you still have a far higher level of support for the center-left mayoral candidates. And I think there's a concern from the city of Vancouver residents that if we amalgamate, then you're going to have people from Surrey or the North Shore essentially calling the shots on certain things that we like to have in the city of Vancouver. So right. I think that's the reason for the appetite to be as low as it was.
Yeah, and we've seen that in Toronto. And I mean, I guess traditionally speaking, suburban areas tend to be a little bit more conservative than really urbanized areas like Metro Vancouver or like Vancouver proper. Yeah, and I guess even people who are more on the right in Vancouver, say folks who might vote for the NPA, often will still carry progressive views more so than their kind of right-wing counterparts in, for example, Surrey or Port Moody. Absolutely. Or something.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference there. And, I remember the election of Rob Ford in Toronto. If you look at the map by wards, what used to be the city of Toronto proper voted for George Mitherman, big, and everything else voted for Ford. So I think there's a fear on the part of some of the city of Vancouver voters that if this happens, then maybe we'll have some progressive candidate in the city of Vancouver who ends up losing the election because of all of the votes from more center-right-minded people in the areas that surround the city right now.
Right. Well, with 34% wanting amalgamation, that it looks like that's not something that'll probably be considered as
not as such. I think there's talk about doing something in North Vancouver because they have the district and the city, and they're going to explore it. There's also Victoria and Saanich who are discussing whether this is something that they want to do. It's a very tough sell here. I think we're very set in our ways, and ultimately. You have so many people who are employed by the councils in their own cities. I don't think you can turn this into a situation where you create a ward system based on the municipalities that we have. I just don't think the people in Burnaby are going to be happy if you tell them you used to have 8 councillors and a mayor. Now you have, let's say, 2 councillors and the mayor is going to be for everything. It's going to be a very difficult sell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm interested in, here we are talking about all the increases in barriers to voter engagement in this 2018 election. That has to do with a lot of things. Our new campaign financing rules, the non-alphabetized ballot, which is randomized. But at the end of the day, isn't this also just a problem with the idea people have set in their minds that municipal elections don't matter? And if so, I'm just wondering if that's something you've been hearing from survey respondents and how you think we might better address that mentality.
Well, There's a couple of problems. I think the first one is consistently people will tell you when you ask them about the three levels of government that the one that has the most impact in their lives is municipal. Ottawa is too far away. Victoria is kind of out there. You care about what is happening within your own municipality. But then the voter turnout is always lower for municipal elections. So it's almost like there's some sort of war going on because they know that this is important. They know that they should be engaged. But when the elections happen, they're distracted or they're doing something different or they were essentially confused by the whole process and the length of the ballot. So there's definitely that. But I think, part of the situation is figuring out a way to connect with voters that is different from what we've done. I think the city of Vancouver, to their credit, did a lot to try to boost voter turnout, more time for the advance polls, allowing people to vote wherever they were, which is also something that is very beneficial. But even with that, the voter turnout was lower than what we saw the last time around. So there's definitely things that we can do. But I think the essence of this to me is figuring out a way to connect with voters. And, we have a housing crisis. We have 67% of residents of Vancouver saying housing is the number one issue. And there just was nobody who was able to connect in a way that would get non-voters to actually cast a ballot. And to me, it's more about the power of ideas. And one of my favorite memories is 2008 election in Indiana, in the U.S., where Barack Obama wins. And nobody expected Barack Obama to do well in the state that was the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. But he found a way. He went to the college cities, he talked to people, he chatted with the youth that was very unengaged and felt that they couldn't do anything in a state that was very Republican, talked about healthcare, talked about specific things he wanted to see happen, and at the end of the night, he carries the state. He wasn't able to do so in 2012, but it was a major surprise and a shock because nobody expected it. Everybody said, well, it's a state that is always going to vote Republican. Obama is an African-American. I mean, this is just not going to happen. But you find a way to connect, and you get that 15-20% of people who never vote to actually care. And I think that was missing from this campaign. There was nobody there who connected in a way that made people care about this for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting observation. I'm tempted, though, to think that it might be more to do with culture, like a culture of appreciating or lack of appreciating the freedom we have to vote or the importance of participating directly in our democracy through voting. For example, I thought that a good way to increase voter turnout over time was what the city did this year to stage elections with high school students and get them used to voting. So, I mean, it's interesting to just think about how much we weigh like individual campaigns and candidates and their ability to sell a message and be charismatic and connect, as you're saying, versus like a culture in Canada or in Vancouver specifically where people just don't care about local elections or more broadly about voting.
Yeah. I think all of those efforts are definitely laudable. They had the election for children that was happening at the same time, and it's a good experience for kids to be able to cast a ballot and to choose something that they want to see happening. I think it definitely works, and it's not like we're not a society that is civilized and talks about the importance of government. I think it has more to do with apathy, and part of that apathy comes from not being motivated. If you're motivated, if you have a candidate who's really speaking to you, who is talking about specific issues that you want to see happening, then you're definitely going to see more people gravitating towards them. And there's a difference in how you can get some of those ideas across, maybe using social media or using some other tools at your disposal that are not as expensive as an advertisement on television. Right. But it's that level of motivation that makes things happen. And once you find that candidate who is talking about things like that, then you'll have a higher voter turnout. I think that's the key here. Trudeau, for instance, back in 2015, the reason he had more votes than any other party in British Columbia for the first time since his dad campaigned in 1968 was because of that level of engagement. There were a lot of people who said, okay, this is the best opportunity to get rid of Harper. I voted for the NDP in the past. I voted Green in the past. I'm just going to go liberal this time and see what happens. And it's that strength of the 18 to 34 vote that gets through the 35% of all cast ballots in the province, which is incredible. The election previous to that under Ignatieff, they got 13%. So you almost triple the number of votes you get because of somebody who is connecting well with youth. And if that is the case in a municipal election, things would be different. I think we saw it in the first election for Gregor Robertson. He gets more than half of the vote, and it's a new party, and it's somebody who had spent only a few years in Victoria for the NDP, and he ends up winning big against a very high-profile figure such as Peter Latner. So if you find that an emotional connection with the voters, then you can get them to come out and vote for you. And I just don't think it happened at the level that many people expected this year.
Right, and that demographic you're referring to, 18 to 25 or 30, the millennial generation, which tends to be so apathetic. Do you have stats on how many in that demographic voted in this 2018 municipal election?
I don't have that. I have my survey, but it's not perfect. I think we need to wait for whatever the City of Vancouver publishes, and I think they will do so in the next couple of weeks, probably.
Okay.
One of the issues there is just trying to figure out just how much people were engaged. And, we always hear this idea of, the over 55s vote more and the 18 to 34s don't vote. And people who did that in 2015 had the Conservatives winning, and they ended up in a very different world the day after. I think every election is different. One of the things that I measure when I do this is the level of emotional connection to the campaign. Is this an exciting campaign? Are you excited? Have you seen things? Is this a situation where you're absolutely certain to vote? And you look at all of those things. In the surveys I did, I didn't see a lot of difference between demographics as far as, millennials versus Generation X versus baby boomers. But the only way to know for sure is to find out what happens afterwards. And after the federal election, when they published the actual voter turnout, it was immensely higher for the younger voters than it was 4 years earlier. So the theory was confirmed. I think we'll need to wait and see what the City of Vancouver says as far as how many people voted in specific age brackets.
Right. That'll definitely be interesting to see. I'll look out for that. And I just wanted to end the interview with a question on a topic that I found quite fascinating from this election and has been brought up in the news quite a bit, which is that our council ended up being, mostly white. And I'm wondering if you intend to do any polling on perhaps why people are more likely to vote for white people versus people of color.
I have two theories on that. One of them is that people gravitated towards party brand. And maybe you arrived at the polling station and wanted to vote for Ken Sim and voted for the entire MPA slate. Or you were maybe upset with Vision Vancouver, but were an environmentally friendly person who voted for the Greens. But you still have the situation of, well, if the Greens were so popular, how come the only Chinese candidate out of the four that were running for council is out? If the MPA did so well, how come the South Asian candidate is the one that kept, missing the threshold to be elected? I think it's a tricky one. In a way, it's always been difficult as a South Asian candidate to be elected in the city. I don't have any, firsthand knowledge about the reason for that. But we went from a council that had two very high-profile Chinese Canadians on it to a council that has zero. And, I don't know if it's connected to the whole issue related to real estate. I think there's been a lot of analysis and a lot of vitriol on social media against a specific group of people who are blamed as foreign owners for the housing crisis. And I think that may have played a role. I mean, I was surprised that Brandon Yan from One City didn't do as well as many people expected. I thought there was an opportunity for the two One City candidates to be elected, and he ends up being way lower than Christine Boyle. So you look at specific parties, and it's kind of strange that the high-profile candidates who were from an ethnic minority are the ones who did worse than the ones who weren't. So I do think it merits more study, but right now it's it's all a theory. Was it people voting for slates, or was it people looking for last names that didn't sound foreign? And I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Right, and there's so many factors that come into play, like where names were placed on the ballot. Christine Boyle's name from one city was near the top. Brandon Yan's was right near the bottom. Also with the NPA, everyone who was elected was white, but also everyone who was elected was a woman. So, did people prefer female candidates to men? There's just so many things, I guess. But do you ever do polling on people's preference based on ethnicity, or do you intend to?
I would like to. I think it's an important topic to look into. I wasn't expecting the makeup of council to be what it is. And, some of the questions that we asked were related to, would you be happy with this mayoral candidate winning? Would you be happy with this party having a majority? I never thought that a question related to, are you happy that you have a council that has no multicultural representation? It never occurred to me to ask it. Now I'm kicking myself for not doing so, but you never know, right? Or asking people how they feel about, just after the fact, it's a little tougher. I don't think you can get into the nitty gritty of it. I don't think we'll find a lot of people who say, I'm disappointed that there's only 2 men in council, in the same way that they probably won't accept that there's a problem when you're looking at the actual makeup and saying, well, maybe there weren't just any good multicultural candidates, and that's the reason why it happened. I think it merits more study, but it can't just be a question about how do you feel about this, because I just don't think you get into the real aspect of the way the decisions to vote for somebody are made. I think it's a challenge because, you don't want to see people essentially saying that they're having problems with a specific group. But, that being said, when I ask people about drivers, everybody who complains, I ask them, who is responsible for bad driving in your municipality? And you have that 10, 15% that always go to race. They're not saying it's men or women, it's older or younger, it's truck drivers, it's people from Alberta. You get roughly 10 or 15% who say Asian, dark-skinned, etc. And if I see that 14% in a survey on something as normal as driving, I can't imagine what I will find if you're asking about politics. So something to look forward to, I guess.
Yeah. But I think what you're touching on, though, too, is that a lot of people aren't maybe overtly racist, but racism can be a sort of subconscious preferencing of certain people, right? Or even that our society is sort of set up in a way that people who are white tend to rise to positions of power more organically. So there might just be more white candidates running because they've been, given the privilege of, being set up for that or whatever. So the issues are a bit more deep rooted when it comes to understanding why our council is mostly white.
Definitely. I think that's definitely part of it. And, there's a change. There's the second generation, the third generation. There's people who are immigrants. There's people who have recently become citizens. I don't think it's a blanket issue necessarily. I mean, there's candidates who have a foreign-sounding name, if you will, whose families have been here for generations. So it's a tough one. I think it may have a lot to do with certain perceptions that you have as far as what people can do in certain discussions or ways in which your family has also voted. That definitely plays a role, but it's a tough one. I mean, I do have it on my list of things to do after the U.S. election. I'd really like to get to the bottom of it. And is there an answer for this? Is it simply gravitating towards names you like? Is it the ballot was too confusing and I forgot to vote for somebody who I really wanted to vote for? Or is it simply, I'm just not comfortable having people of a specific ethnicity in council? And I think it's a question that needs to be asked.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's hard to unpack those biases. So that's all I have for you. Mario, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
My pleasure, anytime.
Okay, take care.
You too, bye.
Bye-bye. Hello, and we're back. Sorry about that brief interlude. What you just heard is an interview I did with Mario Canseco of Research Co. on the results of Vancouver's 2018 election and the survey intake he did from voters and how that intake explains or tries to explain our unusually low voter turnout. So let's take a quick break, and then we're going to be back with a special little skit on proportional representation, which we are currently voting on and are able to vote on until November 30th. So we will be right back after this brief break.
Oh my lord, I need a creative outlet. How on earth can I channel everything that's inside of me?
You know you can do that at CITR and Discorder, right?
Pardon me?
Yeah, you can illustrate for Discorder magazine or take photographs of events and artists, and they can teach you how to use Photoshop in their media lab.
That is so exhilarating. It fills my soul with lightning.
Yeah, just email volunteer@citr.ca and they can help you get started, or just come into the station whenever.
I wouldn't miss it for the world.
This band is really good, and I've been wanting to find out more about local music.
Yeah, I heard about it through CITR and Discorder.
What's that?
It's a radio station. You can review all the music that comes in and help out with touring bands or just do some data entry to get started in their music department.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you can just email volunteer@citr.ca and they can help you get into the station or just come in whenever.
Well, I'll be there, so...
Broken Pencil, the magazine for zine culture. CITR 101.9 FM and Discorder magazine are proud to present Canzine Vancouver. Canzine is the city's giant zine fair and festival of underground printed arts, happening from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. on November 4th, 2018 at SFU Woodwards, which is at 149 West Hastings Street. Canzine is a zine fair and festival of underground print culture, celebrating Vancouver's zines, comics, and works of underground printed weirdness. Over 300 zines and comics on display and sale. You won't find this stuff anywhere else, ever. Only at Canzine. Also, don't miss the Global Zine exhibit and our panel on the rise of Vancouver Noir. For complete festival lineup, visit canzine.ca.
Hello, and we're back. This is Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. This morning, keep saying it's October as well. It's November 1st, and this evening we started out the show with an interview with Mario Canseco, who's the president of Research Co., which is a local polling company in Vancouver. They're one of the most trusted, if not the most trusted polling company in the Vancouver municipal election of 2018. So we got his input and his sort of observations on a recent survey he did with Vancouverites who voted in the election, which kind of comments on the reasons why voter turnout may have been so low. It was 39% when in the 2014 municipal election it was 44%. So there were a variety of reasons he touched on to explain that. Now we have a special piece, which is a skit, which is what the News Collective does so well. Maybe it's our best type of news coverage. So this is put together by News Collective members Samuel Jones and Guillemire. I'm not sure his last name actually, but he's a New Collective member, and these two worked on this little piece to try to educate folks on proportional representation and what it is and the different types of proportional representation being offered to British Columbians in our current referendum, which is underway, and you can participate by mailing in your ballot by November 30th. So let's take a listen to this little piece and try to get ourselves acquainted with what exactly PR is and what different types of PR exist and are options to us. Here we go.
What you know about a boy, huh? Cali.
Yo. Hello. Welcome to the Uncle Sam Show. I'm your host, Uncle Sam. Between now and November 30th, British Columbians can vote on whether they want to change their electoral system from first past the post to a system of proportional representation. So, Professor X, it sounds like mob rule to me. I mean, what does proportional representation even mean?
Well, to be precise, Uncle Sam, democracy is technically mob rule, or you could think of it as collective participation. It's all in the connotation.
Whoa there, that is a mind bender. Okay, we'll get back to that point at a later date. Tell us about PR.
For starters, PR is short for proportional representation. The whole idea of PR is that there will be a greater balance of representation in government because people will be represented in proportion to how they vote. Who is voted into government will reflect more accurately the percentage of candidates and parties who were voted on. This comes in contrast to our current first-past-the-post system, where candidates who receive most votes win in their riding, and those who come in second, third, or fourth, and so on, do not get voted in, no matter how close the race is. In this scenario, any vote for a candidate who does win the most votes is often considered a wasted vote. In a proportional representation system, these wasted votes would still count towards electing preferred candidates.
Now, to dive into 3 kinds of PR the BC is considering for its electoral reform referendum. Professor, guide us through the nonsense with your knowledge. Let's start with mixed member.
With mixed member proportional representation, voters get 2 votes, one for their preferred candidate and one for their preferred party. First, successful candidates fill government. Next, parties choose candidates and obtain seats in government based on the percentage of votes each party receives. This might be done through a quota or a percentage basis for each individual candidate being elected from the party, and they may be chosen from a list within the party.
Now, what is dual member proportional representation? Are those politicians going to be squeezing into the same seat when they go to work, arguing like a married old couple every vote?
Well, with a dual-member system, parties can decide to run 2 candidates in a riding if they want. Whoever gets the most votes gets a seat in government. If the second person did not get enough votes, then those votes go to the party, and the party decides which candidates are to be elected from the surplus votes. Once again, no votes are wasted. Voters specify their preferences on the voting ballot, whether they want person A or person B.
Well, that makes no damn sense, Professor.
All right, Uncle Sam, just calm down. It makes sense, you've just got to listen.
I don't like change, which is why I like this last PR system that BC is considering. Rural-urban, explain that for us.
Okay, basically this is how rural-urban works. Urban areas operate with a mixed member system, and rural areas that are sparsely populated use a first-past-the-post system. Not only that, there would be what is known as top-up regions, which would literally be areas where candidates are being voted in to top up the more accurate proportional picture of voter preferences. This would account for small regions or ridings, and they could be voted in through single transferable vote, which is when you vote by ranking your preferred candidate in preference. So if your candidate does not win, your vote goes to the next preferred candidate. And if that candidate doesn't win, it goes to the next preferred candidate.
Thank you, Professor X, for explaining all that to us. Specifically, the system I am partial to. Now, how about counting the votes? How will that work in these systems?
Sure. Counting all the votes is confusing with all the PR options we have. So let's start with mixed member or dual member. If there are leftover votes from a candidate who did not win in their riding with either mixed member or dual member, then those votes go to the party. Once the party has a certain amount of votes, maybe like a threshold of needing 500 votes to elect someone, they can elect their choice of candidate from their party into government. Alternatively, in rural-urban, they might decide to count via single transferable vote or first past the post, or even a combination of the two. Yet in all cases, I want to stress that knowing how the votes are counted is important and is something we need to be aware of. So please read up on it, listen to this again, and get educated.
Well, that was well said. remember to do some quick Googling, all you folks who are still confused. But the prof and me hope this electrifying explanation has been helpful to those who find PR systems confusing. And let me tell you, I know where you're coming from. Remember to vote before November 30th on the referendum and do your research. This has been Uncle Sam with the Uncle Sam Show and his guest speaker, Professor X. Have a good night.
What you know about a boy, huh? Cali. Yo.
All right, that was a special little skit. Super, informational, but also engaging, I hope. That was put together by Sam and Guy from the News Collective. Well done to both of them. That is all we have for our show today. We're ending a few minutes early. You are listening to CITR 101.9 FM. This is Democracy Watch, the station's local news radio show. My name is Alex DeBoer. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back again next Thursday at 5 p.m. as always with more local news coverage. Please stay tuned to CITR for the next show, which is Flashback with Alec Christensen. Have a good night.